He's always, over the years, I think, Henry, hinted that, there will come a time when he will walk away from this job, and it would be earlier, say, than somebody like Alex Ferguson. But when it happened, it was still a huge shock. There was no hint he was going to do that on Friday.
No, there wasn't, and fair play to Liverpool for managing to keep that under wraps, particularly if he'd told the owners his decision in November. I think he's doing it in a very classy, respectful way. It gives them time to get to work on Bayer Leverkusen and Xabi Alonso, if it is to be him. It certainly, I don't think puts pressure, but it's an extra motivation for the players and the supporters for this drive towards these trophies, towards the end of the season. It gives them that extra edge. He clearly a loss to Liverpool. Talking to Liverpool fans or engaging with them on sort of messages, it is an absolute shock. It's like when Kenny Dalglish stood down. But in this case, I mean, it's a loss to English football because of what he brought. We talk about Pep Guardiola, the influence that he's had, but with Klopp, it's the urgency of the football. It's the fullbacks flying forward, whether Trent Alexander-Arnold or him also stepping into midfield. It's the way he makes players better. It's the emotional engagement with the fans. You see it when he walks onto the pitch after a big win and he stands in front of the Kop and he's like a rock star at Wembley, just absolutely sort of performing but totally engaged with his audience. And I think the other thing is, I love the fact that he genuinely enjoys what he does. Okay, there's the pressure, but he celebrates the great moments. I mean, the 2019, the Champions League celebration in Liverpool, all those fans turned out. And there he was on the back of the open-top bus with a lager in one hand and almost
cigarette
orchestrating. No, I don't think it was a cigarette actually, but he almost fell off the top of the bus, which, don't try this at home. But it was just shows how caught up in the emotion with it. So he would celebrate it and he was totally engaged emotionally with Liverpool.
Look, I'm not saying that every manager doesn't put everything into the job, because they clearly do, but there are different styles. Do you think Klopp maybe expends more energy than most because everything is full on? He was talking about press conferences where he clearly doesn't just give you a bland answer. He analyses every question, and sometimes the reporter gets back an answer which they're not over keen on, and he calls them out. He calls TV reporters out for certain things, as we've seen. He's got a sharp element to him. He's jumping up and down on touchline. He's berating officials. He's celebrating in front of fans, as you say. He celebrates. He kicks every ball. He takes every throw in. And maybe that, over 9 years, is the equivalent of 20 years for another manager.
But don't you want that from your manager? You want that emotional engagement.
Well, I think every manager's different. I'm just saying, do you think that means he expends more energy?
Probably does, yeah, absolutely. And maybe he thinks that 9 years is about right, and he needs to go off and recharge his batteries. But as we saw when he left Dortmund, I think that he will then recharge and return pretty, not swiftly, but maybe he has sort of 6-7 months out. But I can't imagine him just sitting on a beach in Ibiza for the rest of his days. He will absolutely want to come back.
Quite a few comparisons were being made with the time Alex Ferguson decided he was going to leave Manchester United and then changed his mind after being talked out of it by his family. Klopp doesn't sound like a man who's going to change his mind, does he?
No, he doesn't. The only thing against that is that, or maybe he wants this as his legacy for whoever's going to come in, is it's a very young, hungry squad. He's remoulded it. He's rebuilt the midfield in the summer. He's rebuilt the attack. Obviously, he's got to sort out Mo Salah's long-term future. What I would be fascinated to know is that when he's had conversations with players and their agents about renewing their contracts or even joining the club, was there any hint to them about, by the way, this is an issue?
But I want to have a look at some of the maybe more in-depth reads in the papers about Klopp himself, although I have had one text from somebody who says, he was actually anonymous, C, who says, stop banging on about Klopp, he's not died. I don't think that's really understanding the fact that this is a major figure in English and German football and world football.
It's a huge story and will continue till the rest of the season.
Sunday Mirror I looked at first because there's a piece by Robbie Fowler, obviously iconic Liverpool striker, who says, I checked my phone when I heard the shock news to see if it was April the 1st. Klopp going is as big as when Shankly left. Now, you've got to be knocking on a bit to remember the Bill Shankly era. I'm not sure Robbie Fowler would even remember it that much, but in Liverpool folklore, he was the man, Shankly, wasn't he?
It was, the famous scenes of Tony Wilson going around interviewing people on the streets, and they simply didn't believe it. Obviously, this was before mobile phones, before social media, so absolutely in the modern era, the news spread like wildfire, and also he put a video out on the club website, so that's fairly...
Now, a lot of the chief football writers this week have been reminiscing about the fact they sat down with Jurgen at some point on their own for an hour. All of you seem to have got an hour with Jurgen at some point to talk about his career, and it's never dull when you interview him for an hour, is it?
Yeah, not only the sort of chief football writers, but the Grand Dukes as well.
Grand Dukes, yes.
I think, are they self-styled Grand Dukes? But anyway, the chief
sports
writers who sort of wade into other sports. I mean, it's, I don't think I had a full hour with him, but I had sort of 45 minutes with him. And
describe it and tell me what it's like.
It is like, he's like a rock star in terms of his presence, his aura. He is tall, very, very, very funny. We had an argument about, I told him I was at school in Germany for a while, and I've said I got a sort of slight soft spot for German music. I was trying to be sort of friendly, just saying, German music is good. And he just basically laughed me out the room and said, listen, we're the home of the Beatles. I don't think even Die Toten Hosen and Scorpions or whatever can, compete with them.
Nena and 99 Luftballons is not really cutting it, is it, really, compared to the Beatles?
But the humanity of the man, and that is, you talk to Liverpool fans, you just see how he is. His connection, his immediate connection with the Hillsborough families, the work he's done with food banks. Johnny Northcroft in the Sunday Times has written a beautiful piece today talking about, a friend of his. One of their children had passed away, and they received a letter signed by Jurgen Klopp. And it's not simply receiving it, it's the words within it, which sort of carry so much, sort of support and condolences at such a sort of stressful time. So that's humanity. The emotion, the football, the belief. I covered the both legs, the Barcelona game in the Champions League, 3-0 down. You just thought, well, this is going to be an easy match report. Liverpool are out. Messi is going to march on. I remember Istanbul at half-time. A couple of Liverpool fans sort of walked into the press box and said they were heading into Taksim Square, but then they said, no, we'll just go back to our seats because something might happen. Something always happens with Liverpool, and with obviously with Gerrard then and Benitez, and now with or more recently with Klopp. Just there was something when Liverpool emerged from the tunnel. The cop was up for it that night. So rhyming slang there. The cop was up for it that night. Robertson, the way he just stared down and took on Messi, I think he sort of ruffled his hair at one point. There was something about Liverpool, and that was a Klopp team. The mentality monsters, that urgency, that intensity, that emotion, that driving force. But also, and this needs to be stressed with him, he's not simply about mentality and emotion. There's a scientific side to Klopp. You look at his appointments. He brought in a head of nutrition, an amazing woman who's actually sort of done a book on how nutrition can change life for sort of top athletes and sort of mere mortals like us. And he brought in a throwing coach. So there's a scientific side.
But he didn't invent that. People like Big Sam, who gets a lot of stick, he was bringing in this sort of stuff way back in the mid-2000s.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sam didn't invent it. He said when he was playing over in America, there was a sort of gridiron team.
Klopp's way late for this.
Absolutely. No, everything. No one's reinventing the wheel. But I just think that energy, that refocus, redefining it, I think that is his legacy is huge, and it's not simply a loss. Simply for Liverpool, it's a loss for English football because he stood up against Pep Guardiola with all Guardiola's genius and his resources. The last few years would have been a little bit, even more of a procession for Manchester City and their brilliant team, brilliant manager. I get all that, but without Klopp.
I mentioned earlier on though that he could be pretty spiky, certainly in press conferences, and we've seen it on TV TV a number of times. You really have to think out your question with him, pretty much what you had to do with Alex Ferguson and people like that, who was another man who could be wonderfully charming and generous, but could be equally really, really get under your skin and could be quite rude at times, to be honest.
Ferguson was the best interview that I've sort of had the privilege to do in 35, almost 40 years. It's an absolute genius, the use of his words, but also, you're right, if you didn't think out a question, I mean, I had a brief hairdryer for him, not sort of full on like some of the other people have had. But with Klopp, I think one of the issues is that Klopp obviously does a lot of broadcast interviews because, they're stipulated. And inevitably, sometimes the questions are repeats. And you could almost sense the frustration. So you've got, but his relationship with the Merseyside press was obviously strong. He got on with them, and there was a connection, and maybe he could have a go back, and then they would be a good a better relationship or whatever. But I quite like that sparring with managers. I don't think we get enough of it.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.